Hi, everyone. In the next few minutes, I want to take you through a concept which could solve one of the most difficult problems in the world. And I hope I will be able to provoke your thinking and interest. So I'm going to talk about a global poverty elimination lab, which is an action tank. And hopefully there will be many such labs all across the world. So this is just a concept for discussion and to provoke thinking, and it will probably change and get refined a lot. The concept has been put together by Anita Kapoor Bhargav, my wife, and me, Sanjay Bhargav. And you can learn more about us on LinkedIn and read our white papers to give you a little bit more context on what our track record is and what we've been thinking. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so why do I say this is probably the coolest and the most difficult problem in the world? Because what we are talking about is basically trying to establish a utopia on Earth. And poverty, the way we define it, is not just material wealth, but it is also poverty of the mind and poverty of the body. So if you're not content, if you have hate and things like that in your mind, then you're poor. Similarly, if your health is not good, you're poor. And lastly, you need adequate material wealth. So, you know, there are many difficult and cool problems in the world which people need to solve. And they could be climate change, they could be becoming an interplanetary species, and so on and so forth. But I would argue that this problem of trying to establish utopia on Earth is the most difficult problem, because it just does not involve physics and things like that. It involves dealing with humans, dealing with different thoughts and things which could be idiosyncratic at times and may not follow like defined laws as in the laws of physics. So that's what makes it really difficult. And why is it cool is a important question. I mean, it's because if you are part of the elite, as most of the people who will watch this are, then is it really cool that poverty gets eliminated? Because if you are part of the elite, and then there are many people who are trying to help you, as domestic help or whatever it is, is that elimination a good thing for you? I mean, then maybe your help is going to cost you more, and so on and so forth. So it took a civil war to end slavery in the US. So this is not a simple thing, and many people may not consider this cool. But I consider it cool because it's a far-sighted view of the world. Things like terrorism, wars, pandemics, and so on and so forth could be eliminated, and it could be very good if there was a utopia on Earth. Okay, so with that, let's move to the next item. So what we envisage these global poverty elimination labs are as action tanks, which is very different from think tanks. So it's not about studying and researching poverty. And I'm not saying studying and researching poverty is bad. It's very necessary. And maybe that academic work will fuel the action tank. It's also not focused on alleviating poverty, because there are many things there which try to alleviate poverty. And again, those are very good things because otherwise poverty would not be bearable. But so these efforts for alleviating poverty are very good. But what we are trying to do, and this could really be called a moonshot, like what John F. Kennedy did in the 1960s, trying to have what some would consider an impossible dream, but then actually have that dream achieved because of the efforts of many. So the thing of trying to eradicate poverty is very difficult and can be eradicate poverty in this decade. So a lot of the tools which are required to do this are available. So I'm saying that if there is a will, this can certainly be done. Okay. So this is what, and if you take an analogy to cancer, right? Now, things like polio have been eradicated. Can cancer be eradicated? Probably not. I don't know. So this is as difficult as that. Trying to alleviate cancer is great, very necessary, but can cancer be eradicated? So in terms of class of problem, eradicating poverty is as difficult or more difficult than trying to eradicate cancer. And therefore, a lot of people might roll their eyes and say this is going to be impossible. But in my opinion, there is no harm in trying to tackle the impossible, because even if you don't get there, you will make some progress. Okay, so the concept here is that this whole business of eradicating poverty is not necessarily an altruistic goal where people have to donate a lot of money. There has to be a lot of wealth transfer from the rich to the poor, though that may be part of it. But this is a business opportunity. So C.K. Prahlad, Professor Prahlad, had mentioned the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. And now, the fortune may be quite real. So what we are talking about is that the combination of unicorn plus builders, plus using districts as a lab, could result in some very interesting opportunities which do a lot of good and make a lot of money. Right. So in India, there are 750 districts. And if you, which are part of states or union territories, and if you were able to get a chief minister, which is the CM here, interested, and that person was a visionary leader and had some sort of flagship projects, and then believed that attracting unicorn plus builders was the best way to accomplish those flagship projects, then these districts could be used as a lab to get Utopia in one district, and then maybe across a country like India, and then maybe across the world. And this, of course, could happen in parallel in many countries, whether they're developed or developing or emerging or whatever. So it doesn't have to, it's not necessarily based on happening first in India. Okay, so what would the structure of this lab be? So at least in the initial concept, and there are some people working on making these labs a reality. So I hope to see this lab move from just a concept to actually execution very shortly. There would be a kind of research unit which tries to find out what is happening, what are the best practices around the world, so that we are not kind of reinventing the wheel, and also forming templates or solutions to try and attract unicorn plus builders. So it would be a resource for the builders. Okay. Also, a lot of real progress in the world is based on the work done by academics. It would also be, trying to leverage the work, the papers written by academics, which could be translated into action. So we hope that once these labs are set out, A lot of academics who have done brilliant work will want their work not just to be published and peer reviewed and maybe win the Nobel Prize, but also for it to actually help make the world a better place. Okay. Then the other structure would be to of outreach, and outreach to many people. Right? So it's to governments, to regulators, to judiciary, but most importantly to people, because one of the biggest challenges in Utopia is to get people excited and get them to support Utopia and get their mindset changed. And finally, to unicorn plus builders, because people who can build unicorns, people like Elon Musk and people other than Elon Musk, like the young people who are out there, they get attracted and by problems they consider cool and attractive, stuff like that, and which they can solve. So how do you attract unicorn plus builders to work on these problems relating to poverty, which have the potential of doing a lot of good and making a lot of money? So what are the roles in this lab? Now, the way I view this lab is that it's not going to be very large. There are going to be few people, but clearly A-grade people in this lab who will try and catalyze this entire effort pretty much as a venture capital firm does or a private equity firm does through its portfolio companies. And there is a model of this already, which has been running for a long time, I think, called Village Global VC. So this particular idea could build on the ideas in Village Global VC. So the roles could be one as of thought leaders, and thought leaders as distinct from mentors. So thought leaders would work with multiple labs, while mentors would probably work with the portfolio companies in a particular lab. The thought leaders would not necessarily sign NDAs or invest, things like that. The mentors could. And then you would have the actual staffers in the lab, which, like I said, would be a fairly small team. Now, for a unicorn plus builder company, it could go through various stages. Now, these could be incumbents and, they may not go through this particular path, but I'm here talking about a new co. So they would probably need to bootstrap. Some they'll have to put their own money and then apply it to the lab, maybe for 7% give 7% of the equity for about 1 crore or about $150,000, which is more or less the Village Global VC model. Then, if they got a license from a district to solve a flagship problem for the district. And the condition of the license was that they had to raise 100 crores of capital within a specified time, maybe 90 days, maybe 180 days, etc. Then they could use that to raise the capital and then move on to raise money at $100 million valuation, which would be just another milestone in their entire journey, because we are talking about some of these companies becoming $1 trillion plus companies in the next 10 to 20 years. So obviously there are going to be many casualties around the way. Lots of people will try, but few will succeed. Now, the elements for the solution, right? Why am I optimistic that this utopia can be done on Earth? So one is the platform revolution. Like, I see the next decade as the age of platforms, and a lot of the pieces which are required are there. So you have the infrastructure cloud, now you have the data cloud, you have a lot of things going. So the platform revolution is real, and I think it's going to make a huge impact in this decade. The other is disruptive thinking. right? So that has been something that has always fueled a lot of impossible things becoming possible. And again, because of all these elements, the time is ripe for disruption. And finally, the infinity equation, where you try and make your customers tend to infinity. So you say, okay, why can't I serve a poor person? And then I could also serve a rich person. I could serve a middle-class person. I could serve a business, a small business, a large business, and so on and so forth. And I could do it across the world. So I could have maybe 1 billion users or maybe 5 billion users in there, right? So that is trying to get your customers to tend to infinity. And then if your processes don't have any paper and they have a lot of technology, now technology is expensive and could have various kind of costs, but they don't scale with volume in except a stepped way. So if you divide those costs by infinity, they will tend to zero. So essentially, you're trying to get your customers to tend to infinity and your costs to tend to zero. Now, these are just some of the challenges. I mean, this is huge in terms of the numbers of challenges. As I said, it's one of the most difficult problems on the planet. But the first is convincing a chief minister and a district. And trying to say, hey, this problem can be solved if you lay out the red carpet for Unicorn Plus builders. Then attracting the best minds to become Unicorn Plus builders. And third problem, which to me is the most difficult, is making believers of the people. Because a lot of the people are used to like a feudalistic system, saying that this is our destiny, we were born to do this, we can't escape out of our destiny. So making people believers is a very, very tough problem. And then, of course, you're going to hurt vested interests. And there will be plenty of naysayers, who will bring all kinds of issues onto the table. So how do you counter those is a very challenging and interesting problem. So now this global poverty elimination labs could become lead transformation consultants to a state or a district, and say, okay, we'll take a district as a lab, as a small country, and say, okay, can we raise the GDP of this district? Can we have jobs for all in this district? Can we solve the sustainable development goals in this district? So if we can do that, then we can establish a utopia in this district, and in parallel, this work would go on in other districts. And, the task of having utopia in the world could actually happen. So this is not going to be a big bang. It's going to be very incremental steps, which can be measured as you go along. Now, for this consultant, there could be a low retainer, because they don't need too many people. They need some quality people, and those quality people have to be paid. So there has to be some kind of a retainer, and then a capped success fee. Right? So just as if you join a startup which becomes huge, then you make a lot of money. So similarly, if you're part of GPEL and your portfolio companies become very large, and the district also benefits, then your compensation structure should be such that you do well, but obviously you need some kind of a cap on the success fee. And there should be a quarterly review so that if the consultant is not performing well, they can be fired, and maybe there's a 3-month transition period and a new consultant can come. And finally, there is this whole question of how do you do this in an open source way? So if you take GitHub, you take Bitcoin, and so on and so forth, can you open source this and do this as a collaborative effort? Because it's such a hard problem, right? And there's so much to gain that collaboration could be a very good thing. Then there is a very important mindset change, especially in a country like India, which has socialistic roots. So the thing is that most of these countries, and even in the US, some of the countries, some of the ideology could be that the government has to spend. And that is true on certain infrastructure, and all the government has to spend. But in quite a few cases, the government need not spend. And say the telecom industry in India is a good example, where a huge amount of infrastructure was built and the government actually made money. So there was negative use of public money in terms of getting outcomes, which were very good for the citizens. So if this is used, and say someone wants to say that we want cheap credit for all our residents in our district. So we are looking for innovative proposals as to how this can happen. Okay, and we will be enabling. Okay, but then we will also license you, and maybe we license maybe 2 or 3 people, and maybe you'll have to give us some of your founders' equity because we are going to be the enabling district for you, and we will help you get all the clearances that you need, regulatory changes, etc., etc. But you will also have to give us performance guarantees. And the fact that you're well capitalized will make sure that we can enforce those guarantees. Now, why would, so the toughest problem for Unicorn Plus builders, according to me, is not building a team or raising capital and things like that. These are very tough problems, but not the toughest. The toughest problem, according to me, is the getting critical mass. And that is something that highly populated countries like India can provide in spades. So you can have a number of users and you can refine your concept. That is huge. The amount of money that is spent on customer acquisition, customer retention, customer service, customer advocacy, data collection is huge. So if the district acts as an enabler for this, then the value of that to the Unicorn Plus builders is immense. So I've said this before, that many will try, few will succeed. We need many labs, we need collaboration, and the Bitcoin and the GitHub are interesting models. So the bottom line, and I will end with this, is that some of these companies which emerge from these labs and this disruptive thinking and all, we could have a $1 trillion market cap in 10 to 20 years. Now, if a company had 1 billion users at just $10 annual revenue per user, then it's $10 billion in revenue. Now, if this company grew to have 5 billion users, and these could be around the globe, poor people, middle-class people, rich people, businesses, small businesses, large businesses, etc. But the ARPU was just still $20. Then it's a $100 billion revenue company. So Apple today has around $3.65 billion of revenue, and it's a $3 trillion company. So, so when I'm saying $1 trillion market cap, this is not impossible. It's very difficult, maybe improbable, but not impossible. So I will end here, and I hope to discuss this concept with a lot of people to refine my thinking, but more importantly, for people to build on this concept and maybe change it radically, but to try and work on this really cool problem, which is trying to establish utopia on Earth. Thank you very much for listening to me.